know about you?
One of the first things I just want to mention is the fact that, yes, I've been working as a software tester for a couple of years now. It was a change for me. And that means I've learned a thing or two about the company where I work and how they do testing. But, you know, a couple of years is not a super long time compared to how long some people have done it. I was the one who asked for this to be a topic because I thought, well, I want to learn more about testing if people have ideas, but because I asked for it and worked in the field, it became, oh, well, maybe you can present. Yeah. What I might like to do is run this session perhaps slightly differently from the way some of them are done. Like I have notes with some of my own thoughts, but because I want to learn, in some cases I have specific questions I'd like to throw out there and hear what people might have to say. So yeah, I have some notes I've prepared and a few other things. In my case, I was a developer for about 16 years in the insurance industry, and that was working with old technology, mainframe, COBOL, JCL, things like that. I got laid off from that job, went back to school to learn some stuff about new, more up-to-date technology, did a couple of upgrading certificates at the local college, and it was after that, well, during that time I did a few co-op jobs, and after that landed in a full-time job as a software tester. And the place where I work now, we use Visual Studio, C#, some web-based stuff with quite a bit of JavaScript and jQuery frameworks, things like that. So a big change for me. But the interesting thing about that is the fact that other people I've met, like at my old job, or even where I work now, or at various events I've been to, I've come across a lot of people who maybe were developers, work on the technical side of something, or maybe were, like in the insurance industry, say underwriters, worked on the business side, and then when there was a need for people to work testing software, companies recognize, oh, you have some skills that could be useful for that. So a lot of people seem to land in software testing by kind of an indirect path, rather than it being the type of thing where people grow up and they're a little kid and think, oh, I want to grow up and be a software tester. That's what they major in at school, and that's what they land in. I don't know if that might change as worldwide demand for software increases. Maybe more universities will offer software testing as a full-time major. It's possible. But this is one thing I'm curious about. Like, can anyone else here comment? Have you found what I found, or do you find people who had their eye on software testing early in life and that's what they went for, or what? Any thoughts, anybody?
Going to the non-profit stuff, you're going to find a lot of that. You're thrust into the position without necessarily having that academic background for it.
Yeah.
Specifically for the non-profits. Not all about the commercial or manufacturing industries, whether or not software testing or happen chance thing, or if people are needed to do testing. I kind of hope that the people who do the software on the Boeing 737s have some formal training in software testing.
There's very few courses in formal software testing is the problem. There's kind of large universities within the United States that have actual like certificate programs for software testing. I recently heard that Fanshawe University in London actually now has an actual course in software testing. So it's like a program you can actually go through for software testing, but there's very few like actual like coursework that you can do to be a software tester. A lot of those, in my experience, anyway, coming from that idea that it's not something that, yeah, like you said, somebody grows up wanting to do. Even if you find a passion for it, being like going through as a software developer, takes computer science programs, and they maybe doing a co-op and kind of developing a little bit of a passion for it. But there are very few courses that I'm aware of that somebody would actually major in software testing.
You say Fanshawe in London?
Fanshawe, yeah.
I think, okay, so from my background in quality management, and now that I'm in IT, my take on it would be software quality testing, whatever environment, it could be a subset of software quality engineering. So there would be one or two courses, just like when I went back to school, there would be a couple courses on tech writing, in a tech support program. Similarly, in software quality engineering, there'd be courses on project management, technical writing, quality assurance, quality management, total quality management, software testing. I'm not an expert. I'm not a PhD in software quality engineering. I think those would be some check boxes. But for sure, there should be somewhere, maybe at a night school, as this gentleman said, a course in software quality testing. But I might be asking, it might be a stretch. Does that make sense to anyone at all?
Well, it fits in with my experience. Like when I went back to college, one of the certificates I did included a course on software testing. So it was part of that.
What was it part of this testing? Part of the certificate program?
Yeah, it was
Call
one of the
what?
courses I took. Yeah.
What was it called?
Mobile Solutions Design was the title of the certificate. Software testing was one of the courses. Now, one thing that seems to happen as a result of that is with people landing in a software testing role with different backgrounds and maybe not a lot of formal training specifically for that role. A number of people have experiences like I had just the other day. I was looking at something online, the presentation on YouTube, and the guy was using various terminology, different types of testing. I understood what some of them meant, but not all of them. And even then, you talk to people from different companies. Okay, people talk about unit testing, integration testing, predicate testing, decision testing, path testing, and everyone doesn't always mean exactly the same thing, because from one company to another, they kind of come up with their own flavor of what they think that means. So I frequently find myself a little bit concerned, well, gee, should I know what all these terms mean everyone's talking about? But I've spoken to people and found, well, I'm in good company if I don't always know all of them, or if my idea is slightly different from someone else's. That's a pretty, as far as I know, fairly common thing that can happen in this field.
I know what happens at big companies like Microsoft. I don't know, with Google or something, but a few years back when I got interested in them, for example, Microsoft entry position will be software developer in test. So that means you use your development skills to write tests, automating the testing process, you know, of the software. And so you need strong programming skills, but also you have to be familiar with all the testing. You know, they have this, The Art of Testing. I remember a book by Mears written like a few years back, and all kinds of ways how you test software. Well, for example, when Windows XP came up, at that time it was a solid software because they put lots of emphasis on testing each component and everything. So that's a way, but they also have like internal courses. I don't know personally myself, I've been told by people working there, where they train testers how to test software. And then you have a chance to be promoted like full developer once you have shown your skills in writing automated tests.
It's not a new experience, what you're saying. I did some work in tech writing, and I think in software too. They'll use language like post-mortem instead of lessons learned or things gone wrong, things gone. Nothing died. Post-mortem, you launched your product, whether it's software or a hardware, a widget. Post-mortem, totally stupid language. They use benchmark instead of milestone, okay? A benchmark is not a milestone. A benchmark is a standard of practice in any kind of making widgets, software, that you look at as a standard to go by, or to meet, or not to meet, or to exceed. Milestone is not. Milestone is an item in project management. And like the line group, just what you just said, oh, I'm confused, they call this, that, in this environment, but it's over there. So there's a lot of, jargon that gets all mangled up, and you just have to work through it.
But in Agile terminology, post-mortem is actually a retrospective, yeah, of a sprint, or when you go over what went wrong or how you could have done it better. Yeah. So,
It doesn't imply that there's been some kind of disaster that needs to be analyzed.
yeah.
For a successful project that's completed, you might want to do an analysis on how well it went and what things are worth emulating. That should not be called post-mortem. Should be called pre-mortem.
Maybe it was the development team that died after the project.
Yeah.
I was talking to an engineer who works for Dramatic, is that a company? Anyways, something like that. But he was telling me if you want to get into any kind of development, software testing would be initial start. And then you could go on to there to, like what George has said, development, or you could get into DevOps, or whatever the case may be. That's was my experience when I was talking to an engineer.
I think that's a good step to be familiar with the domain, yeah? Because if a company is focused on a specific domain, by testing you get familiar with the application domain, but also, yeah.
Yeah.
Does it mean that the testing is done by the most junior, inexperienced programmers that are out there?
At the beginning, I would think, that doesn't make any sense to me, unless they're not designing the tests, they're just running them.
Yeah, but they probably mold you into what they want for the software testing. So it's going to be a learning curve, like anything else.
Right, but the conceit, I don't know, I'm not really familiar with what's going on in the industry, but my assumption is that you have to conceive of the tests first. You have to understand what the problem is that the software is addressing.
Oh yeah, before you
And
set
what
it up.
algorithms,
Of course,
you have to
yeah.
understand the algorithms and then try and figure out the limitations and so on.
Yeah,
Before that takes maybe a degree in philosophy, I'm not sure.
Before it goes to client, it's got to be like super analyzed, correct?
Yeah.
It depends. If you do like functional testing, yeah, it's like you take the manual, yeah, you don't need programming skills. If you do like manually or, yeah, but if you want to automate, yeah, it's kind of above the unit testing. If you want develop some tools so later on can be used for regression testing or something, yeah, then you need programming. So it depends on what level, yeah, you are testing.
When I worked in a large company, they would get newer, more junior testers to do certain types of tasks. They had testers with a lot of years of experience who might be supervising those more junior testers for certain projects. That was a fairly common thing that would happen there. It was an interesting experience for me one time on a software upgrade project. I was a developer but working as a tester to take an initial look at it because they wanted someone who could at least partly diagnose problems and report to the DBA what was going on. For a database upgrade. But then when the business people were doing their testing, they had a co-op student who was going to university working with us in the summer. And the manager she was working for wanted to give her a taste of what it's like working in a full-time environment like this, including jobs where you go around and work with other departments. So that was an opportunity for her to come and work with IT. What was interesting for me was going from working with very experienced testers, some of whom had been developers and knew the company's business every which way, to someone who was quite new to all of this stuff. so she had a lot of questions. I did my best to be helpful. And between us, we got the work done. It was a successful project. So, but yeah, I think in that case, it was kind of like what you were describing. She relied on some more experienced people to conceive of what the tests would be like, at least at a high level. Then she worked out certain details of random tests. Testing is something that different project managers take different approaches to. I've worked with everything from project managers who would be right in there, sitting in walkthrough meetings looking at the tests ahead of time, to ones who just want the developers and testers to get on with their job, just report to the manager at a summary level. But if problems come up in testing, then the manager has to more directly intervene. It can be tricky, but a good manager is often someone who can keep their eye on everything at a summary level. Then when problems come up in testing, they can jump in, assess the situation to a fine level of detail, and determine a course of action. From a testing perspective, that means summarizing for the manager what they need to know to make a good decision without taking up too much of their time describing every test. In any technical role, that can be tricky, developing, testing, whatever. And of course, for testers, it's always a challenge balancing the need to be thorough versus meeting schedules. You can almost always think of more tests. Always. I've been in situations where I was talking to my manager about testing that had been done on a project, certain things we just hadn't had time for. I would like to do this or that, and she quite bluntly said right to my face, "No, you're done." Well, that's sort of that. Sometimes that happens. Schedules are tight. And sometimes that's where walkthroughs or working with a group can be helpful, because people who know different aspects of the system can sometimes suggest, there are a few tests that would cover a lot of things. You don't necessarily need to do as many. Or, suggestions like that can help with that. Now, writing test plans can take a significant amount of time. And this is something where, I want to mention something I've come across a couple of times that ties into planning. This is a screenshot I grabbed from YouTube from a presentation by a fellow named James Buck. You can see his picture there. I'm hoping that the fact that he puts his presentations up on YouTube for free means he doesn't mind me borrowing a few screenshots to share. He has ideas about testing. He's worked on some interesting projects. He says he intensely dislikes these textbooks. He says, textbooks about testing, forget them, don't read them, you will not learn anything. I got this textbook when I went back to college, and it was the textbook for my software testing course. The teacher did not use it at all. He said he hates teaching from textbooks. He doesn't have much use for them either. Well, I've already spent the money on the books. I like to be prepared. I don't like to show up the first day of class still scrambling to get all my supplies or what have you. I actually don't entirely agree that textbooks are useless. I got some good ideas from here. But when it comes to writing test plans or executing tests, where textbooks can be helpful to me is this. The main problem is the same thing you find in other technical fields, textbooks I've come across, which is the authors maybe suffer from what I call perfect worldism, which means the techniques and diagrams and examples that they describe would be great to use if you had unlimited amounts of time and money to write the perfect test plan and do perfect agile development or whatever. That's not real life. It never is. And I can't tell my manager Well, no testing has actually been done, but I produced these great detailed diagrams and test plans that are just the best you could possibly see for this project. But where some of the ideas from textbooks can come in handy, or have for me, is more like this. I've been in situations where certain parts of a project, a certain part of the test plan was maybe a bit difficult to figure out. And I remember, well, there is a technique in a textbook that kind of describes what you can do here. And what I do may not be really complex or, totally professional looking flowchart or diagram. It might just be a pencil scribbled on the back of a piece of paper and some numbers. But I got the idea for how to approach the problem from a book, and it helps me work out part of what I have to do to pass some tests. So my opinion of textbooks is not quite the same as this guy's or my teacher's. I would say, by all means, read some if you want, but use them. Use the ideas as appropriate. Because if you look at some of these, there are diagrams in this in here with all these numbers and letters. Sorry if that's hard to see at the back. But like I was saying, I can't show my boss after days of work. I just produced a great big diagram. He wants more than that done faster.
What book is that?
It's just called Software Testing. Well, here, if you want to take a closer look, pass it around and take a glance. It's a little beat up, but
It's been tested.
So I mentioned this fella, James Bach, and his presentations he puts on YouTube. If you do look at some of his presentations, I will say this. If you were at a party and you met some people you'd never met before and they ask you what you do, and you say software tester, people are not necessarily going to say, oh wow, how exciting, tell me all about it. But this guy, on YouTube, he makes software testing sound not just interesting, but even fun or entertaining. Yeah, I mean, he's opinionated, he'll tell you exactly what he thinks, but he's not dull. And one thing, and this next picture is from one of his presentations. So this is just a simple little flow chart. Not a whole lot to it, but it does illustrate an interesting point of view on testing and what it would be like when you work in software testing. When I watched the presentation on YouTube a few years ago, the first time, and it got to this part where he says to the audience, okay, look at this, how do you test this, how many tests, well, yeah, it's right there, how many test cases are needed to test this product. I initially fell into the type of thinking a lot of people do. You think of maybe a couple of test cases, you want to go down each branch, so you've covered the yes and the no. Maybe a boundary test is a less than 70, exactly equal to 70, greater than 70. When I looked at it more recently, after being in the job full time for a while, I thought of quite a few more test cases. I think off the top of my head I had 7 or 8. Because just looking at the first box, input A, I thought, well, wait a minute. What if I click the button to do the calculation or proceed or however it works, before I've even entered anything, it's blank, no. You want to make sure the system does not blow right up. Anyone who has worked with software knows that can happen without proper data validation or error catching. Something's not there, some software gets really cranky. As well as, what if I fill the field with a really big number, the maximum you could possibly put in there? Sometimes, if developers haven't thought of that possibility, funky things can occur. I've seen that happen too. Like as a tester, I don't always know exactly, to the finest detail, what happened in the code. I just do know I've done that. I've filled a data field with, the max it could take, or just totally blank. or whatever, and yeah, strange things can happen, errors can occur. And eventually you might store the result, as you can see, and if you're not careful, if input A was a data field on screen designed to take integers, you had better make sure the file where you're storing something can also accept integers, or float, or double, or whatever data type. So you may want to look at that, try a few things, see what happens. Data validation, in my experience, can take quite a bit of time. But it's something that can get better if you stick in a job with a company for a while, because some companies will build up libraries that are reusable for those type of functions. The place where I'm working now has been working towards that. Sometimes it pops up a lot more if you're branching out into a different platform. Say you work for a company that built a lot of desktop applications, but now they want to do more web-based stuff. So you're building in a different language, maybe using JavaScript instead of C# or whatever. So certain things that maybe people are used to doing, maybe haven't thought about for a while, like just basic data validation, could come up again in that situation. So as you gain more experience with software testing, you can look at even a simple diagram like this and think of a lot more tests than you did when you were a beginner at the job. Now that said, I work with another software tester more experienced than me, where I work now. I like to think I come up with good test plans, but he often thinks of even more stuff. And actually, it's not just software testers. Another point I was going to mention, sorry, I was kind of skipping around the notes I prepared, but you often work with a lot of other people, including, say, technical writers, and they may want to look at some of your documentation or the developer notes or whatever to help figure out how to write the manual for the users. But in order for the technical writer to understand the software, they often like to try using it themselves and play with the system a bit. And sometimes they try something that was different from what was done in all the tests that I and the other testers planned, and they raise new points. This is especially true if the technical writer is someone who is in the job because they have experience in the industry, know the business side, they're going to think of other things. So it's interesting that to some degree, almost anyone from the project manager to the testers themselves, to the developers, to the technical writers, to the sales team, end up being testers to some degree or another. Yeah, at least that's been my experience. Just go back to
kind of relative to that, I feel like it's an interesting kind of role of a QA person, right? So the QA person isn't just the person there is to test that and try the different combinations to find a possible issue in that flow chart. Right? They can be bringing back that user experience. Developer can code it and write it exactly the way the business analyst says to meet the requirements of that piece. But as the person is testing it, maybe they figure out that that actually doesn't really kind of make sense or doesn't really feel right from a user's perspective.
Exactly, yeah.
Tech writers do something in a company that has a budget for it. I think something called Usability Studies, where they bring sample, naive users in and run the software through them, and that could be an origin of what you're just saying. It's not something just the thought that the technical writer brought up in their head. It's from users that have gone through the software to see how usable it is, and it's scored accordingly. Things will come out of that as well, but not all companies do usability studies.
Yeah, it can be tricky sometimes when you're developing a new product to know what the customers are going to want if you are trying to develop it fairly broadly for a lot of potential customers. It helps a lot once you get feedback from at least a few initial customers. But then the next customer could have very different requirements. Yeah.
How effective are, speaking of usability standards or testing, because I have the feeling sometimes if you bring these people, they are biased, yeah? They might say, you know, I don't want to upset you, or will say that, oh, this thing maybe it's good, or, you know, if it's on the edge, you know, they'll say it's good even though, you know, it's, I think there is a bias nature to that, especially if they have some incentive, you know. You come here, we'll pay for your time or something, yeah.
The other thing, so that we use a site called usertesting.com to get some feedback, and that's like individuals that get paid. The other thing I'm concerned about is AOTA testing, so the accessibility testing, and that's going to really come into play in 2020, I think. I don't think you can get away from not having accessible sites. And that's another real skill that I think QA has to pick up on, or at least some people. There's real expertise in there to navigate, to make sure your screen readers read the pages properly and stuff.
Yeah, that was something the Ontario government passed some legislation about, was it? Or
Yeah, it's called the AOTA, so Accessibility for Ontarians Disability Act.
yeah, I think I remember hearing about that.
That's going to be, how you say it. So the way we deal with trying to get as much coverage as possible on the team I'm currently on, and we're trying to kind of lead a change within within the business unit I work for, is we have what we call the Three Amigos. So you have your QA, your developer, and your business analyst, and your BA, and you try to think of the coverage. So the QA is really good at thinking of the non-happy path scenarios. The developer is good at we're using something called the gherkin language. So it's like a given this, when I do this, I expect this. So the developer is good at organizing that so that they can kind of glue the code to the tests easier on the test automation. And the BA is really good at understanding all the kind of the business scenarios. And you get a really nice coverage. You get some really nice coverage at the end of it. And that's one way to do it. So sometimes you might have a really strong BA, a new developer, and an okay QA.
This is BAs and business analysts?
Yeah. And because you have a really strong BA, you still get really good coverage because they might think of scenarios that the other two haven't. So if you've got a brand new person here, a really experienced person here, when you combine the three of them, it's really nice.
Yeah, it sounds like an approach where there would be a lot of, I guess what you would call cross-training would happen as you go along,
Yeah.
picking up on each other.
Because nothing drives me more crazy as a developer that the QA person was just holding back like these 5 tests just to show that he can create 5 defects. Why didn't you tell me that up front when I was trying to develop the code? And I would have had my code in place to make sure that I was handling like the validation errors like you were saying and stuff like that. But if they hold it back, then you're not producing quality right off the bat and you're wasting time. Especially if they had 5 things they're going to try. Why not put that in the document up front to let the developer know what they're going to, what they need to think about with their code.
Oh yeah, that's happened at places where I've worked, where the test plans were written ahead of time and reviewed by several team members, including the developers, and they were expected to use that or keep it in mind while doing the development.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Yeah. But then it's very common in testing to be following the plan, but while you're in the middle of a test that was in the plan, you suddenly realize, oh, wait a minute, what would happen if I did this or that?
Yeah.
You think of more tests.
So kind of exploratory testing, but at least try to be, I say it, collaborative as much as you can, right, up front, so that the developer isn't caught with like 5 things that they didn't even know QA was going to test.
Yeah, especially if it could have been caught earlier.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforwardly. Yeah. Speaking of things like that, once you get into testing and reporting bugs and keeping in mind the fact that the developers have worked hard on the code, it's always good to make sure that reporting bugs requires a bit of consideration, a bit of tact. And with that in mind, what I usually like to do is I try to avoid the use of pronouns when I'm reporting bugs or discussing things in meetings. I never say your code or your program or so-and-so didn't work very well. I just keep it business-like for what, to the matter at hand, and what the problem is. But then, if when things are fixed, if we're reviewing stuff in a meeting, I'll make a point of, mention someone by name and say, yeah, thank you for fixing those. I know those were some tough parts. So I like to keep things positive and be considerate of other people that way. It's also important to make sure a bug report keeps things short and to the point as much as possible. If you discover a bug several steps into a test case, you'll often end up backtracking to see whether you have to follow all of those steps to get to the bug, or can't be pared down to just a few steps. Because you don't want the developer to have to take loads and loads of time running all these steps if they're not necessary. Sometimes they are. But it's a good investment often of the tester's time to try to pare down the test case or the bug to the main point and put that in the bug report. It's something, it's also something that comes a bit more with experience. As you work with the system, you get to recognize ways you can often pare down a procedure to get to the source of an error more quickly. Now, going back for a moment to a bit about writing test plans, another thing that's difficult, as with any project and any aspect of it, be it development or testing, things are constantly changing. Bugs can come up, you report it to the project manager, it maybe goes to the business analyst, and it means a real change in direction for a project, or a significant change to part of the system. So everyone's affected by that, the developers, the testers, and sometimes what that means is you have to revise test plans quickly. And sometimes near the end of a project, test plans aren't always written in as much detail or not peer-reviewed as carefully because there's just so much time. So sometimes through a project life cycle, you go from really top-notch documentation up front to stuff that was a bit rushed near the end, but sometimes it just can't be helped.
Are you a big proponent of test automation?
Automated testing is not something I personally have done a whole lot so far, a little bit. It's something I'm interested in and would like to try doing more of.
Okay. The reason why I ask is because what we get caught on is as you get further into the project, if it's been manually tested, you fix a defect and you break things that no one has time to go back and test.
Yeah.
So if it was automated, you would run up everything that came before.
Oh yeah, I would agree. Automated testing is really good for situations like that.
Okay.
One place where I worked, we had a standard regression test set. And what that did was it took the system and put a really big transaction through it, well, a set of transactions. So this was literally a transaction that exercised the whole system very thoroughly. And we had printouts of what all the screens looked like if it all worked. So at the end of each release, or the development phase for each release, or after a big project, it was expected that someone on the team would run the standard regression test and report the results to the team supervisor. And discuss anything that came up that was wrong to figure out, okay, is that because of the changes in this release, so that's legitimate and that's the new standard result. So keeping that up to date was also an important task.
Okay.
Sorry, I missed something at the beginning of the conversation, talking about having insufficient time near the end of the project to complete the testing.
Well, or all the aspects like documenting everything.
And you were correct with saying that having an automated test suite helps with that.
Yeah, because part of what he said was, I think you were saying something about, in the project, there's complex bugs you're fixing, and right away in my head I'm thinking, Yeah, what we find is when we do manual testing is we fix a complex bug and we test just that one area, but it actually broke 2 other things. Because you don't have full automated progression, you go to production with bugs.
This is where it makes automated regression testing. We catch those with help with the next development cycle.
Yeah.
At the place where I work now, it's something we're looking into doing more of in the future, automated testing. We've done a little bit.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to show people, obsproject.com. This website has a tool that a colleague of mine where I work now recommended. I downloaded the Windows version at work, and as it says here, you can use it for video recording and live streaming. We use it at work to capture videos of like a window, because it will grab the pull-down menus and message boxes and just about everything. Because Windows 10's built-in gaming recorder won't capture everything, but for test purposes, sometimes you need a lot of detail. Sometimes the very nature of the test is what happened when you clicked on a certain menu, sub-menu, what have you, and what happens. And it can be very confusing and hard to describe that just in words in a bug report. So capturing the video can help. So as I say, I honestly don't know if this product is the absolute best out there for it. A colleague at work recommended it. It seemed to work well for my purposes.
So we use the very same piece of software for video streaming at the CTF radio station. But there it's a production, so it's not a testing purpose that we use to broadcast a video stream.
Okay.
So one of the things that I've found for capturing everything that appears on the screen is to actually run a virtual machine and have the virtual machine host do the recording of what it presents on its virtual screen. So VirtualBox, for example, does a good job of screen capture recording inside the VirtualBox. Everything that happens on the screen in that virtual machine gets captured. Mouse clicks, double clicks, the little outline windows that you catch as you're driving a mouse cursor along, everything gets caught. And that's then without introducing additional software in that virtual operating system that we can feel with the software that I've been testing.
That's a good idea.
Of course, I don't know how good the VirtualBox virtual machine is to produce a production system. It's certainly good for screen capture, and I do it mostly for screen capture presentations for software testing.
Okay, so there are a few tools that might suit different organizations and all. This one that I was just talking about here, it was a little tricky to set up, but once I got it going, it's pretty easy to use. And the videos that it captures are often fairly compact compared to other tools I've used. Uses a bit less memory, I've noticed. Now, another thing I want to discuss, going back to James Block and his presentations, this is from the same presentation. He talks about a system he found. He didn't say exactly where it was, but he purposely made the background a bit blurry for that reason. But he worked on a system, and as it points out in the bubble here, he gained full control of a computer, which was not really supposed to happen. And the way he claims he did that actually raises an interesting point. He's talking about what my colleagues where I work now call monkey testing, where you take a system and you try to hammer it with filling every input field with a huge amount of data, the maximum it will take. You literally just type a little something and then copy, paste, make it grow to a massive size, whatever. Do that with every field. Click buttons as fast as you possibly can everywhere to see if something will blow up or break.
I've heard that called fuzzing.
Yeah, okay, well again, there are different names for things. However, there's one big drawback to doing that type of testing. You may find a serious problem that needs attention and should be fixed. However, to try to recreate that error and describe what you did and make it happen again, that could be very difficult.
Difficult to create reproducible errors using monkey
Yeah.
testing.
So then, you've got this serious problem that you know really should be fixed. You don't want that to happen again. But what got you there? If you were just clicking all over the place as fast as you could do that again and the exact same thing may not occur again if it came down to really precise timing or whatever. Some testers claim they can do that. They say they can do that type of fuzzing or monkey testing and describe what they did and get it again. Well, maybe some people can. I have found it to be rather difficult when I've encountered that situation myself. But like I said, this guy's presentations are not dull. He has interesting stories like that and things like he does. Yeah. Okay. Now, some testers will say that if they do find a really nasty bug, an especially serious error, that's when they and their fellow testers high-five each other. They think, yeah, we got one, great. That's when they really take pride in what they've accomplished. There are different opinions on that. Personally, I don't quite look at it that way. The way I look at it is if I do find a nasty bug, and report it to the developers, and work with them to recreate the error, get it fixed, retest it, make sure things are good. And as a team, we have found and fixed a nasty problem. To me, then it's the time for high-fiving each other and say, yeah, we're successful. I mean,
It's a good attitude.
well, that's just my opinion. Different people have different thoughts. That's how I like to look at it. As a former developer myself, I'm very mindful of what it's like to be in the developer's role. And I am mindful of that.
We just say, thank God I didn't get their prod.
Well, exactly. Exactly. I have had conversations with developers who have said to me things like, oh yeah, if you find problems, you're probably going to say to me, oh, this really stinks. And I've said to people, no, you know me better than that. I wouldn't say that to you. I wouldn't. That's not how I like to work with people. But I have made comments like what you were just saying. Well, you know, if I do, better I find it than a customer. Especially an irate, impatient customer. Right? Now, load testing. Load testing raises an interesting point. There are a few things I want to talk about that. On the one hand, okay, when I use the term load testing, I'm referring to hitting a system with a lot of transactions in a short time. And it's important because a lot of testing might be the kind where you try to pick apart a lot of what-if scenarios. It takes a lot of time to build one test that has a lot of steps in it or whatever. But then you want to make sure the system is strong enough to stand up to being bombarded with a lot of activity in a short time. It's always good to know. So you might take some of your test cases and try to duplicate them, make larger test files that the system's going to read, things like that. This is another type of testing where it can be harder to track down errors, because if the system does get bogged down and is not very responsive, it may not even be writing to the logs everything it normally would or should. So you don't have as much useful information to track down where the problem was. So sometimes you end up paring down the load test, running a smaller part of it to try to track down what caused the problem in the middle of a big process. It's something that sometimes requires teamwork. You may have a few testers bombarding the system all at once. I've been in situations like that before. That requires coordination and planning because you may not want everyone doing the exact same thing all at once. Now there's one thing about load testing that raises what to me is a bit of an ironic point. I want to show you something. Let me just bring that up here. I can't find it here. Yeah. Okay, this is a little utility. Nothing super complex. As you can see, you can enter bits of data in these boxes. That label says string, but it's actually meant to take a number. And down we go, we fill in several boxes, enter a number here for a number of repetitions, and click submit, and it will just make a little block of data here, or a big one if you have lots of repetitions. And as you can see, this looks like XML tags. And that's the whole point. It's a little something I put together because at work we needed some large XML files to do some load testing. But it's tedious to copy and paste XML when some records have to be unique. Hence the numbers in the middle of all of this that this utility automatically increments, so you end up going from 1 through 10 like that. So I could do other things with this. I could have opening tags and a bit of data, then a number, the rest of the data, closing tag, whatever. It's not meant to be something super fancy or pretty. It was just for test purposes. I've used it a bit and was able to get the results I wanted. There's one thing that's very ironic about using a utility like this, though. I'm a software tester. I built this. Now, you might think I, of all people, would take something I made and test it very carefully to make sure it was really, really good. Well, it was just for me and one developer, just for test purposes, not something the customer was going to see. If something goes wrong, I know how to tweak the code and juggle it around a bit. So no, it's not very well tested. It does have bugs, but that actually makes sense. So think what you will of that, but there it is. Now, if I was working in a bigger department, the place where I work now is fairly small. We're all in one room. But if I was in a big company working with a whole testing team and we wanted lots of tools for everyone to use to make everything more efficient, well, that's a different story. But yeah, it occurred to me that that's kind of an interesting anecdote, and yeah, a little ironic, but that can happen. I'm going to keep this around and maybe refine it more because I could see this coming up in more projects I might be working on in future. So yeah, sometimes the tester's own utilities that he or she made are not the most well tested in the world, but
In sharing information, one of the things we found with load testing is we benefited from asserting, like still putting assertions in there. So if you, say, sign on to a site with these credentials, you expect these things to show up. And when you put that under load, sometimes, especially when you move into new technology stack, doesn't quite behave the way you think it does. So you might, you might have threading issues, or you might not. So just putting assertions on your load tests could save you a lot of grief.
yeah, issues with threads, that's something.
Singletons, if you don't use the singleton, that type of stuff.
Yeah. Well, in that case, could a thing like that pop up not just through load testing, but even just taking something a developer has, say, unit tested carefully, but then when you start doing several things at once, not necessarily a huge load, but if something is a singleton, but maybe that wasn't the best design pattern for it, that type of testing might shake everything like that as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, we do load testing and we benefited from assert. You could take that or leave it, but that was...
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, but if you're going to spend the time to do load testing, why won't you assert? Just put the assertions in, rather than just loading it, put the assertions in, and then you can make sure you don't have any type of cross-pollination issues, thread issues, singleton issues.
We've just used a number of words that, not being a developer, are
Sorry.
assertions, singletons.
Okay. So assertions would be a QA term.
Yeah.
So an example would be in Spring, the default, when you, sorry, I might be going a bit too developer-y, but the default is something called, default scope for an entity being is called is a singleton, but if you don't know that and you use it thinking that it's thread safe, you're in big trouble, as an example. So a QA tester could add a lot of benefit if they're doing load testing just by making sure that there is, it's more than just throwing load at the system, it's making sure that you're getting back the results that you expected to get back based on your testing.
And you would do this by not just examining the input and the output and treating the software like a black box.
Well, that's that, you would need to examine your equipment, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Take that extra step and make sure that you get the expected.
So I've been under the assumption here that all the software testing we've mostly done here is treat the software under test as a black box, providing certain inputs and then examining the output to make sure.
But sometime with load testing, you don't examine the input. So I'm just saying it's, in my experience, it's beneficial in load testing to also examine the input.
So my question then led me to consider using something like a debugging tool where you're actually examining the flow of the code, where you can check to see the state of variables, the amount of allocated ground and stuff like that, looking at the innards of the code that you're actually testing, rather than just examining inputs and outputs. Is that a common practice in software testing?
If you're lucky enough to be able to put if you're a QA person, lucky enough to be able to put a debugger on the code, that's very beneficial. If that's part of your responsibility. A lot of
it's not common.
It's not, I don't think, it wasn't common in our organization until recently. We offshored a lot of the QA, and a lot of it was manual testing offshore, so they did their thing, the developers would throw the code over the wall to them and hope that they catch the issues, but they didn't have access to the code. Or if we did, there's nothing stopping them, but that wasn't how they did their testing.
Sometimes code walkthroughs will be something that testers will participate in. And some automated testing tools will provide a summary of which assertions got that correct results and which did not. Like they'll have ways you can quickly zero in on which ones went wrong, even in a big load. And if you're doing web-based testing, a lot of the browsers do that. You dig into the source code and use some of their built-in debug tools, of course. But that's something I've done from time to time. So, yeah. One point I wanted to raise that kind of ties in with some of the things we were just talking about. WatchMe is a little utility you can get for free online to keep track of time. You can set countdown timers over times to see how long things take. And I threw it in here just because it's it illustrates some of the points we were alluding to. How if this was some sort of system for keeping track of employees at work, and maybe they sign in at different times at the start of their shift. If each one of these individual timers works just fine, that's great, you would test that. But if you're an executive and you see reports that compile data from all these employees, that could mean that in an object-oriented environment, each employee is an object, has its own timer. The minute you create another function that has to get data from one of those objects and look at it or do something with it, you had better make sure you clear out that data before you read the next object. Not a super complex concept, but what I do know from a testing perspective is this. Whenever you carefully test one thing and make sure digits in 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day, in a certain order, day, month, year. In another system, or else it has to be year, month, day, whatever, which means you have to start pulling the dates apart piece by piece into separate fields and put them in the right boxes. Well, guess what? When it comes time to send a date back and forth, if you're not careful, a month ends up in the date field or something like that. I saw it happen.
Oh, it happens all the time.
And so
It's a major metadata issue.
each system tested by itself produces perfectly valid input and output.
Yeah.
It's only the interoperability between the two systems that identifies problems in
Oh,
the
yeah,
aggregate
they
system.
wouldn't catch otherwise. But you didn't catch looking at each individually. Yeah. In that case, I ended up making it part of my standard regression tests for those parts of the system I worked on to look carefully at dates. I just wanted to check that every time we had that many problems. And the thing is, if problems like that went too far or got before the user acceptance testers, to me, that's a problem because you're going to look a bit unprofessional if something that should be as straightforward as getting dates right didn't work. Currencies, if you're an international company, you have to deal with money going from dollars in one country, say even between Canada and the US, or British pounds and pence or whatever, issues like that can pop up. Another interesting thing just about dates is the fact that if you ever are testing a system that has date-sensitive logic, test what happens in a leap year on the last day of February. You might be surprised what can happen. I know of one case where something really funky occurred with a transaction that was due at the end of February in a leap year. Some systems don't handle that very well. And it can be easy to miss because in that case I'm not talking about the really old mainframe COBOL type systems I used to work with. This was at the time newer software. I mean, this is going back a few years to the early 2000s, but it was a Java-based system, probably with libraries to handle standard things like dates, calendars, whatever. And yet, there it was. Now, to be fair, I'm not 100% sure if the problem is completely on that side or to do with the interface with the older system, I don't know. But as a general rule to remember I took from that is if I'm testing anything date sensitive, I'm looking at leap years.
Have you had issues with time zones? Maybe more on the browser side of things.
Anybody who's ever got the calendar software can all have thousands.
On systems I personally have worked on, it's not something I've had to do with a lot, but now that you mention it, I can take a pretty good guess that that's another funky thing for some systems. Yeah. You've encountered that, have you?
I have,
Yeah.
with mobile devices on different time zones across the country. We had to make sure that we knew the time zone they were in before it came into our system, so we normalize it to like Eastern Standard Time. Right? So,
Alright.
so it's simple things like that.
And only do one time, and that's UTC.
Yeah.
Everything in our knowledge is UTC.
Our core our core system is Eastern Standard Time.
You know how you said you don't always test the output, it's usually the input, and then you apply the box with the software or whatever. How does that work though when you write a program to another program? As long as the input and the output are the same, that can be done from the preprocessor. But if there's a case where it's locally not going to be the same output? For the software to test.
Yes. Okay, so if we have, if you work with web services, you have these contracts. contracts define how to communicate between different systems. So that's the newer way. Is that how, like you have service contracts? Is that where you're going? So if I don't know if this is where you're going, but if I have a system that I know I have multiple consumers from, one of the things that you can do is you can do these contracts. So basically, if you're a consumer of my service, you tell me how you're using my service, and if I change my service, I'm going to look at how you would use my service and make sure I don't break you. So you would actually define, here's what I'm going to send in on the input, here's what I'm going to get on the output, and I don't even have to talk to you. I've already got all of your tests that I run against my service, so I know if I change my service, I'm not going to break you. It's your responsibility to make sure that your contract is accurate as to how you consume my service.
That's a point.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that allows me to change my service without having to go and have you test your system and this person test their system and this person test their system. That's the modern way to do it. You can also use versioning on your services.
It ends up being an administrative contract, really, that defines who ends up being responsible and who ends up fixing the problem.
Yeah, so if I break in, it's as much his fault as it's mine. He's the one that told me how he's using the system, and I used his test data, his tests, when I changed my service to make sure my service still, make sure I haven't broken any of my consumers. And that's what they're engaged in to run his tests. That's kind of like the new way to go about it. If you want to look it up, it's called spring contracts. Spring contracts would be the example. Spring contracts. Thank you.
Going back to what we were saying about time zones or things like money, dates, it is interesting that these are things we deal with as a matter of course every day. We spend money, cash, whatever, check our calendar, what day is it today, look at the time. They're just such common day-to-day things we deal with without much thought. Unless you work in software development or testing, then you realize the big amounts of time and effort that end up going into what a lot of people give so little thought a lot of the time. Yeah. Now this is another screen grab from one of James Bond's YouTube presentations. And in this case, he raises this question: the system shall operate at an input voltage range of nominal 100 to 250 VAC, and how would you test that? Well, he says a poor answer is try it in that range, essentially. I wouldn't say that's a poor answer. I would say it's an incomplete answer. Of course, you're going to want to test the proper range it's supposed to work in, but when I looked at this presentation, I thought of something that he does talk about, which was test beyond that range. And then he asks an interesting question. He says, why? Now, the funny thing about asking testers, why would you test this or that, is the fact that sometimes in testing, and I've been through this myself, after testing different systems, you get an idea of what kind of problems can happen. You do similar tests when you encounter a similar situation. You don't always know precisely why something goes wrong, but you have a sense for it, and with experience you get more creative about thinking of new tests. In his presentations, he really pushes people to try to articulate in detail why you would test something. That can be kind of hard, because some tests occur to you and it's more intuitive. But in this case, the better answer is to go beyond that range. And he raises a few points. I'll share a few of my thoughts on the subject. Maybe the user manual will say this device works within that range. Maybe the user's manual will give warnings not to go outside that range. Maybe customers are not going to read the manual very carefully. You never know what might happen. So then the question is, if your system fails, does it fail gracefully? if too high of a voltage goes through an electrical component, does the system detect that and shut down quickly before something gets badly damaged? It's still good to test these things. What if you test something below the specified range? Well, if the system is designed to handle a certain minimum and up, who knows what might happen if the value is too low? I don't know exactly what could happen or go wrong, but my intuition tells me something funky may occur. That's good to figure out. And I mean, this is a simple example that illustrates a good point. Whatever is specified for a system, testers are constantly thinking, what happens if something goes above or beyond that? More than that, less than that, whatever. Now, again, you only have so much time and you can't always test everything you might like, but it's a good general rule to keep in mind.
So it's a function of the software tester to design the tests to see what the reaction is outside of the accepted parameters.
Yeah. Now, it's good to do a bit of teamwork on that because sometimes there are safety concerns. I mean, in his presentations, James Bott talks about medical devices he's tested in a testing lab, but sometimes with delicate electrical equipment. If you are putting way too much voltage through something, something could literally burn, fry, there's a fire safety hazard there. So testers can't just say, oh, I'll go way out here, there, or wherever. So you have to find out from your project manager or the developers what is reasonably safe.
How much of a budget you got to fry equipment?
Well, the prototype for the piece of equipment could have been quite expensive for the company to produce. You don't have so many of them, right? So you have to be quite mindful of that.
I have an example of that. Back when I took electronics, I only graduated from Constable College in 1985. In the lab once, we made these microprocessors that were 1 kilobyte memory, and 5 volts DC was the power source. Well, somehow one guy, I don't know how he did it, we got the wall voltage across the chip, and it blew it to smithereens.
When I was in grade 8, the kid showed up at school with one of those, I think it was a Christmas card, the kind you open up and it plays a little tune. It had a little electronic device in there that could produce beeps at the right frequency and pitch to make musical notes. Play a little tune. It had a small battery in there to make it work. He opened it up, got some wires to see what was happening, hooked up like a 9-volt battery. It didn't work very well after that. It didn't outright blow up or melt. But yeah, he at the time he was not a professional tester. Maybe he ended up in a job like that. I don't know.
I've done that too. When I built a timer, I wanted to use 2 different voltages. One's to run the timing circuit, and the other one to do the signaling. I got the reverse of it, more smoke came out of it. Yeah.
5 timer?
No, I took a rotating motor.
Oh, okay.
It was a higher voltage than the signal in the low voltage system. Smoke came out, literally.
Yeah. Now, although, as I mentioned, as a tester, it's good to try to think beyond the parameters that are specified for a system. You also run into another issue I mentioned, which is there's only so much time. If the specifications and the developer notes have been documented in a lot of detail, it's probably expected your tests cover the points raised there. And you may spend quite a bit of your time making sure your test plan and the test you run cover all of that. Then you want to maybe get through that efficiently enough that there's more time to go beyond that. It can become a bit of a time management issue. One thing that can be tricky about testing is making sure that a system has a consistent look and feel. And I ran into a bit of a problem with this. I was working on a system, and one of my colleagues pointed out something I hadn't realized. The font on a few menu items and buttons on one part of the system wasn't quite the same as the rest of the system. It was a very similar font and almost the same size, so if you didn't look closely at certain letters, you would barely even notice, but somehow you caught it. But it's good for your application to have a consistent look and feel. You want to use the same font at the same size, ideally. Buttons, if the text on buttons have any shadow effects, they should all use that or not use that, colors, whatever. So sometimes if you're not carefully looking for that, it can be easy to miss if it's a subtle difference.
Is that a software tester's responsibility to find those things?
That may depend on where you work. It's not a task I was specifically told. It was my job to look for that, but when it came up, I noted it as something that I, as a software tester, thought I should try to be mindful of.
One of the neat things that we're doing now is we have an actual UX design team, and we're supposed to be creating pixel perfect pages in the web. So you can take their design and you can change the opacity and you can overlay it on top of your finished work, and you can see if the fonts and the space and the pattern and stuff. So it works really nice. It's amazing how quickly you can catch things.
Now that said, sometimes we are testing things to make sure if you are resizing windows or purposely zooming in, zooming out, things still look reasonable.
Yeah.
That type of testing, however, you can't be a perfectionist about, because if people start doing a lot of really funky resizing, zoom in, zoom out, things are going to start looking a bit wonky in some way, shape, or form. If you can make it look reasonable, you sometimes have to leave it at that. But yeah, that sounds like a very interesting tool that you were describing. I could save time trying to cover this type of testing.
Yeah, sometimes it's like, that font's the wrong font, and you just did a little typo on it, basically went to a different type of font. It's so close that unless you overlay it, you can't catch it.
Yeah, and button availability. Yeah, I wanted to talk about that because that's another thing that maybe people think is or should be simple, but can end up taking a lot of time. With a lot of desktop apps or web apps, if a certain function cannot be done because of the state the system's in, you make the button unavailable, or grayed out, or call it what you will, it is disabled. Then, when things change, the user has entered some valid data, you make it available. All right, fine. But when you have a system with several buttons and a number of rules for what's available when, it can become pretty time-consuming to get all those rules written down for the developers to follow. And as a tester, it's been made clear to me I am expected to test that with care. Because otherwise, if a function is available when it shouldn't be, you can get bad results, nasty errors. But I've worked on systems where the number of rules for the different buttons was not a huge list, but there were several for each button. And when you get into the fact that there are rules and exceptions to rules and what have you, it becomes a somewhat time-consuming task to test properly and fix everything that comes up. So it's one of those things that I think is a general thing for lots of testers to be aware of and keep in mind. Even if you've worked on a system before, if any of those rules change, revisit that, regression test some of the button availability can be a good idea. Another interesting thing is the fact that, when I was showing you, what was it? One of the screen grabs I had here of Watch Me. This is a nice example where you can easily see you've got like 3 functions that are doing basically the same thing. Now, I've worked on systems where, yeah, you test that, you test each by itself, you test several, doing the same thing all at once. What if a system has a couple of features that appear to have little or nothing to do with each other? I mean, in the case of this system, it can do countdown timers or like stopwatch timers. So, you know, you've got a lot of timer objects in the background. All right, fine. It's good to test similar functions running at the same time, make sure they don't crash into each other, they're not trying to grab the same resources, the same thread, whatever. What if you have functions that have no obvious connection? They're just part of the same system. It's actually a good idea to test some of those running at the same time, or a whole bunch of disparate functions all at once. You may, and this is more of an intuitive thing, it can be really hard to explain why, but I do know this. Sometimes you will shake out a funky bug specifically because the developer developed and unit tested the one function one day, the other another day, a few at the same time, but not all of them. And I mean, some of the classic examples would be just to do with memory. If it was a mobile app that had a few functions, and there was a limited amount of memory, and it turns out one of the system's features is a bit of a memory hog, other functions come crashing to a halt. Oh, that's not good. Or if they all have to talk to the same database and end up having to try to get at the same or update the same record at the same time, that is a possible concern. Or if one is just waiting and waiting for the record to be free. Again, those are classic examples that have been around for a long time, but they illustrate the point. Or beyond software, in terms of hardware, if you're working on a system that has, say, some kind of a monitor that's not actually performing a lot of functions, maybe it's just on a factory floor, keeping track of the number of devices that have been manufactured on an assembly line every day, or you have multiple assembly lines, and you're summarizing that data. So this monitor is doing nothing more than taking bits of data from several different systems and just displaying. But what if something goes wrong with just one of those connections to one of your assembly lines? Do the others keep going? Does that display system still show the data it can show? You might want to run these totally separate assembly lines, making totally different products at once, if they can interact in any way. You know, they are still part of the system in some way.
That's good thinking. It's awesome. It's like you almost need somebody like you that doesn't have like a day-to-day task, just thinking of all those type of things, just to make the system better, just to catch those things. I think that you have a lot of really good knowledge. I also see on here you talk about security. One of the things that we benefit from in our org is we have pen tested, and when you're on the browser, you think you've disabled that button, but there's nothing stopping a user from going through the document object model and enabling that button again and hitting it. So one of the things like QA tester could bring is a bit of that knowledge around in browsers, how you can manipulate things, turn things on and off. Does the back-end system catch those changes?
SQL injection.
Yeah.
Another thing.
Basically, data validation of the server.
Yeah.
Relying on the client to do the data validation.
Yeah, like should you have been able to hit that submit button if you didn't have this and this filled in? Does the server catch it or does it let it go through? And do you now have like corrupt data on the back end?
There's very loud arguments about that. I'm a big believer in the server to all work.
Yeah.
There are others who say you can't make a server to all work, you've got to get the client in, but
You should at least catch it on the server side.
yes. And that means you still have to do the very same test. You have to duplicate all the data validation testing you've got on the client already. So why duplicate that? Why not just rely on the server to do it all in the first place? That way you only have a single point of and you're improving throughput because you're not doing all the data validation twice.
So with the single page applications, you're supposed to do a lot of it within the browser, so it doesn't even have to go back to the server.
Yes, that was the argument that I had. Yes, that would be nice,
Yeah.
But, you've got,
Yeah.
you're giving somebody access to a raw data stream. And they don't necessarily remain in the visible interface that the development will
Right, so the risk of putting on the UI is it gets tested and it looks like it's caught.
Yeah.
But unluckily, you don't have it on the server side, so somebody can hack that. and
Exactly.
you're in big trouble.
Exactly. So you've got to duplicate all that validation functionality on the server. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah, like on the client side, it's probably, far too easy for any hacker to then see what you are checking and know anything you might have missed.
well, but there's that too. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wouldn't suggest not doing data validation testing at the client side because it might lead to a discovery of vulnerabilities. Because the client-side data validation is still valuable, and it's doing it is more valuable than the potential of somebody discovering an omission. If you do no testing at the client side at all, omissions aren't. I mean, everything's a omission. I don't think it's a valid reason to not do client-side testing because somebody may discover an omission in the evaluation suite.
Yeah, where does QA stop and pen testing start? If you don't have a big budget in your organization to do pen testing, I think a lot falls on the QA shoulders.
But on the client side, it's a lot of stuff is hidden anyways. It's more on the server and your all the back end, right? Where it doesn't see what's going on, so you want to duplicate the testing.
Yes, but Trent's point was that you want to minimize the load on the server. And so you want to do as much upfront data validation at the client side as possible so that you're reducing the load on the server. My point is that that leads to a vulnerability where somebody doesn't rely on the user interface of the client side and goes in behind and just shoots raw data. By possibly looking at what the data validation tests are in the server and deliberately bypassing them to send invalid data to the server to cause a breach. So the server still has to check for all the things the client has checked for. Right? That's
It's just more vulnerable to be hacked at that point.
yes, that's my thought. But you know, Craig is a very valid point. So one way to achieve that is to do the data validation at the client side, then digitally sign it at the client with a cryptographic key, so that the data that gets sent down to the server is known to be good because it's cryptographically signed.
Never thought of that. Pretty interesting.
Yeah. But you've now gone from a simple, form to fill in on a web page to a whole cryptographic engine at the client.
The point about security I had noted here was to do with logs and the fact that sometimes the developers will have put extra information in systems logs to debug things, but you have to clean that up before it actually goes out as a finished product, because that could be sensitive information that should not be available at the customer site. This is especially true if you were testing and debugging the actual security features of the system in question.
And do you create defects if you see errors in the logs, or you don't see them on the UI?
Yes, I have done that because the developers, including the fellow in charge of development, wants the logs to work right and be clean and what have you. And that's especially urgent in a situation like one that I encountered, where it wasn't just, it was something in the log that actually was correct. It should be there, and the information in that message was all correct. The problem was too much of it. It was looping and repeating that again and again, so the log is going to balloon to a massive size if that keeps up. That's not good. So by looking right in the logs, you find things that are not immediately obvious just looking at the user interface. Yeah.
That's a good point. So you're finding PI data that shouldn't be there. You're finding errors that maybe you don't see on the UI side of things, but the services at the back end is throwing errors.
Yeah. Now I wish I could say that that was the type of error I found because I am clever enough to look at and assess a system and suspect a problem that could exist. Which brings me to another interesting point about testing. If I'm brutally honest, I have to admit that a number of defects I find on systems I test were found because the test cases I designed, and documented, and followed took me there. And there's the bug. But close to half the time, bugs come up. I wasn't even looking for that. It's like an accident, or I don't even get to the step that was the main point of the written test plan. Wait a minute. What happened? That's not right. It happens all the time in testing. But I know I'm in good company. I've had conversations with other testers who have very similar experience. Quite a bit of what gets found. No, wasn't exactly looking for that, but there it was. I believe the science fiction writer Isaac Asimov was credited as saying one of the most profound statements in science is not eureka, but that's odd. In software testing, I think one of the most maybe important or common and important statements is it supposed to do that? Yeah, very common. So yeah,
I think it's good to understand that usually once a test passes once, it's usually going to pass kind of forever going forward, right? Like you've written a test case, you've run it, and it either passed or it failed, and you found an issue out of that, which then creates a bug and gets fixed, and the next time you run that test case, well, now it passes because it's fixed. But yeah, test cases I always find are the things to kind of get you into some area to test and find a problem versus the test cases, test plans you're writing typically fail.
And like somebody mentioned earlier when we were talking about regression testing, a fix to one part of the system for one bug may affect what you had tested before and it still has to be redone. Or you do find a bug, or the same bug comes back, or a variation thereof. That can happen too. Yeah.
Can I just go back to logs for a second? It seems circular to be relying on the logs of an application that you're testing itself. Because how can you be sure that the logs the application is producing are actually correct if you're testing the application for validity? So the application could be printing correct logs even though it's actually malfunctioning inside, which is the thing you're testing for.
Well, on systems I've worked on, or places where I've worked, the direction I was given by my boss was that looking at these logs was expected, and I didn't argue about it particularly. See, as a tester, sometimes I'm expected to at least start the diagnostic process, not just hand something to the developers, oh, this didn't work. And if I'm expected to start diagnosing, sometimes that means at least looking in the logs a bit when a problem does come up. Now, I think your question might be more along the lines of, well, if something's going wrong with a system, but the output matches what's in the log, that's not really highlighting a problem. But then again, if I know what the system is supposed to do, I should be able to spot, oh, the system is wrong, and the log is doing its job properly. It's logging what happened, but that's not what was supposed to happen. Sometimes looking at the log is a clue.
I worry about the case where the log indicates everything is good,
Yeah.
and the output may also be good, so the inputs are creating the desired output, and logs indicate that. But in the meantime, something is badly going amiss in the internals of the program. I'm not sure if that's going to be a problem, but you see this, I see this, on a lot of web-based applications which were never designed with my slow, miserable 2-core computer. So although it works fine on the developer's 8-core computer, it really illustrates a problem in processing that it can't handle simple input on a platform that the developer did not have, or the testers possibly did not test with. So, and it's usually simple things like forms that are not using the browser's form capability, but the forms have been completely redesigned and are re-rendered using JavaScript. Now you have these JavaScript forms that are doing a task that the browser is already built to perform. So now there's all this JavaScript running to do something that just bogs down the whole system. That it isn't necessary in the first place.
So in that case, the system could appear to work normally, and
it produces the correct output for a given input.
Yeah.
But the process in getting from here to there is absolutely painful.
Very inefficient.
Yes,
And the logs won't show anything wrong
that's
either.
correct.
Sometimes you don't know you have this type of issue, so you go to prod or get a wide user base. And there's things out there that, so we use a product called New Relic, where we actually have JavaScript on the client side that's telling us about the user experience. So if you hit this page and it takes you a lot longer for the page to load, and when you hit submit, it takes a lot longer than everybody else for that to come back. We can get information about the browser and some information about the client, and we'll become aware.
What was that called?
New Relic, N-E-W, Relic, R-E-L-I-C. And that gives us logs from, in a way, it gives us data about each of the clients, and then we can respond to that.
Is this an optional component of the client's users like read to?
Not really. It's kind of we kind of embed that
Surveillance
all.
software.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I guess there's ways they could turn it off, but for the most part, they have.
I go around raving rants about corporate surveillance.
Yeah.
See,
Even with the best of intentions,
I guess one thing you could use logs for, if you are concerned about efficiency, is looking at the timestamps on some of the log entries and seeing, okay, after a new version of the system is developed, does it seem like the time between certain activities has increased a lot? If so, is there an efficiency issue here? Or design something to scan the logs and report on that, maybe?
which is good when the people writing the logging software actually provide with daily timestamps.
On systems I've worked on, they've been pretty good that way that I've seen. Maybe that's not always the case, but yeah.
The one check I do is
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
it's
after 9.
after 9.
Yeah, it is after 9 o'clock now, so maybe this would be a good time to open things up for any final questions or comments.
You make me scared. I feel like on our team, we're kind of moving towards more of the developer-centric model, and we're looking for people with a QA background that also have that developer background. But I'm wondering if we're setting ourselves up in a way because we don't have that real experience QA hat in there. We're kind of moving away from that. And everything that you kind of said makes me a bit worried about all the things that you think about that comes through your experience.
But just bring all of your own knowledge and experience to the task, and try to work with other people to share all of your knowledge and experience. Right? Well, when I started my new job, I had worked for one company for a long time. I was there 16 years, got laid off, in and out of a few co-op jobs while I was back at school, got hired to a new full-time job, felt a bit intimidated. It's always hard facing up to a whole new job, new company, but I figured, well, I just have to bring whatever experience, knowledge, ideas, and if all else fails, nothing but sheer determination, and do the best I can. So, okay.
Do you find that, with ELDA, that you find you have enough
With sorry?
with the accessibility thing? Because everyone's under that crunch, right? They have a 2020 deadline, like it's pretty well here.
Yeah.
So do you find that, do you find like a dearth of developers, like well versed enough to?
No, like we even brought in another vendor, and I was surprised that after developing for 3 months, when I finally said I better educate myself in AODA, how much we got wrong. And these guys were supposed to be the experts, not necessarily on AODA, but on new web UI development. Like AODA is really going back to the basics. Like you should really be using like H1, H2 tags, buttons, like select boxes, and everyone's building these like divs everywhere. Right?
That's exactly what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and you can't do that because all the screen readers expect like HTML. Like they expect, like if you hit a page and you've got proper headers, the screen reader could say, okay, well here's the sections on the page based off of the
Posh.
based off the
Semantic HTML.
Because I find that when you take a step back and you take a look at all of this about to hit, that like all those companies that do accessibility software are under crunch now because everyone is approaching them and telling them like, we're doing this, how can you help us to modify like your
I think we're looking to have a couple developers really educated on it. Part of the code reviews to push back when they see things that aren't lining up, but we're kind of behind the gun, or behind a bit, because we don't have those developers in place right now.
Yeah, because there are big issues. I mean, some of the governments have said that you won't even be able to get your software in unless like.
And I think if you're a big company, you're also worried about like class action suits if we don't get it right.
What was that?
Like I think when it comes around, it says you had to have this done, make it accessible, and you have like a site that's available to 1 million people, and it's not that way.
And you get to different jurisdictions where the rules are different from other places.
Yeah, like LibreOffice, for example, because it's in a German jurisdiction. So I'm not too sure if the rules apply there. So like when you do, if you're applying to the Canadian government, I imagine we have to apply, right?
We have some tools in place where we have things that read the page and says whether or not you're compliant, but that's only for that component or that page. It's not about the navigation from your navigation up here, navigation down here, making sure that you're using H1, H2 tags instead of just divs. Like it doesn't catch any of that. So.
Do you use JAWS?
No.
That's the Windows software.
It's actually pretty damn good. It's kept up with what I consider poor coding practices of a lot of web developers. So it's actually able to unparse or undo the JavaScript to be able to get usable, accessible output from things that were designed that way. But not all screen readers are like that. I've worked with staff that have used things like Braille, an actual physical device in front of the keyboard that raises dots to show you what the text is. If the text isn't rendered through standard methods, nothing happens on the dots. So if you're doing Ajax stuff, the mechanical device doesn't do Ajax. So if you're loading new material through JavaScript, this mechanical device is not a suit.
I work for the company that on Medium, the digital PDFs, and we used JAWS for the Europe part. Not in English, but also in French. And my French is like, grade school stuff, so I could follow along, but had to slow it down when it came to doing the French version.
So it's called JAWS?
Yep.
JAWS, okay.
Yeah.
And that's a reader or that's a tester?
No, that's reader.
It's been
Okay,
around
I just
for-
use my MacBook reader. There's a reader right up on that.
Oh,
The next has one called Orca, but JAWS is the one that's preferred by most people with vision.
Okay.
There's demo versions you can try for trial basis.
That's the other way around, that's speaking, that's speech to text. JAWS is text to speech.
Well, the school
Speech
board, school board
recognition.
is John.
We need a blind UI developer. That would be the best.
Yes.
For that type of testing.
I'm serious, they are.
Yeah, there's
they
just
are.
nothing better than someone who is in, whatever situation,
Yeah,
that they, live that way and know what they need.
yeah.
They connected online?
I believe so.
We actually close our eyes with a screen reader trying to get.
No, it doesn't work at all. I worked with a gentleman who was using JAWS back in the text days, and we just implemented something where newspapers were being transmitted through the blanking signal on TVO. So every screen that was transmitted had two scan lines that contained digital data to deliver newspapers. And so I was doing the sysadmin for this software, and went up to see Jeff, and in his office, he was reading stuff on the screen at 3 or 4 times regular speech rates. And he could perfectly understand what was going on. I had no clue what was going on at all. It's always I was to install something on his computer. But the monitor was on. The monitor was somewhere else. He didn't use a monitor. He used his joystick. He says, oh yes, let me hook up the device for the visually dependent. That was me. Because it was an advantage. Because I couldn't keep up with the speed at which he was able to work with this JAWS software. Just incredible. So just closing your eyes and seeing if you can manage that is not the way that blind people
It's not the
actually
same.
work with technology. Okay, so if you can just go to silvac.com/KWNPSA, you just want to show folks where the notes were that I took tonight. Silvac.com /KWNPSA, the other slash.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's not that slash, that part. That's the one I'm thinking. Silvac.com/regular slash question. Yeah, that's the wrong one.
That one?
Yeah, KWNPSA. We can no longer do those problems between those things. Should be down a little further where the current things are gone far. And I look at software testing. So if you scroll down on here, all my notes should be visible at the moment. I'll be moving those into as a little bit of introductions. I've been trying to keep up with our conversation as it's going on. And I think Mark's taken some extensive notes as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll be, if you have anything else that you want to add, please feel free to log into it. It's a wiki, it's meant for people to contribute to. So feel free to add stuff to that, and to try and get Nick's presentation notes as well.
Yeah.
And upload them as a media link to this. I wouldn't mind getting a link for those YouTube videos, so just so I can add.
Yeah, all,
Lovely.
yeah. Sure. Yeah, just remind me later and we'll forward you the stuff,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Nice. Well, good notes.
Thanks for the presentation.
Not what people found it.
This is really my typing speed.
What's that?
Really improved my typing speed.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.